This presentation is focusing on the development of ADHD from childhood through to adolescence.
Looking at a basic summary of ADHD. ADHD, or what it's also known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a neurobehavioral disorder, most often found in children in the early stages of childhood. It may continue into adolescence and so forth. Kessler et al. 2005. It's more commonly diagnosed with boys than girls, and in terms of symptoms, you may have lack of focus or hyperactivity, not paying attention as much, or being distracted. Often, this is treated with medication, therapy, and lifestyle changes. However, what is found more commonly in research is that medication seems to be the common way of treating ADHD. Hello, my name is Kieran. Throughout looking at the causes of ADHD, it is easy to assume that there is only one causation that can be tied to this established mental health problem. I will critically present on the genetic and hereditary side of ADHD and whether there is a sole link to genetics or if there is, in fact, several different contributing factors to what constitutes ADHD. Sharp et al. 2009. Twin and family studies show substantial genetic hereditability with little or no family environmental effect. Looking further into this paper, it was evident they mean to continue down a sole genetic path, and the only mentioning of a potential familial link is solely genetic and not any environmental influence. A common trait I have seen throughout is the mentioning of the dopamine transporter, also known as DAT1, is both present in the linkage studies and genome-wide association studies. Both methods use a different way to examine and analyse genes. It would be good to ask if this research can be trusted and if it is a credible support for ADHD's heritable link. Larger sample sizes for association studies would be recommended for future research into the causes of ADHD based on the endophenotypes and chemical subtypes they claim to be the sole cause. However, studies are yet to find a high genetic susceptibility to ADHD. Lee et al. 2014. There were talks regarding a susceptible hormone and if it is responsible for ADHD in children. Jin et al. 2016. However, upon critiquing, it was found that no significant data is present for the existence of an ADHD hormone. Tai et al. 2012 discusses how potential phenotypes may help with the detection of susceptible genes of ADHD. The phenotype present in this study is a very low frequency electroencephalographic, or EEG. They reported that only modest activity could be found, but stresses that further investigation into the neurological and genetic link is warranted. It eludes me that they believe this study requires further research without mentioning what should be altered in the future. Looking at the method, they tell us how 67 pairs of twins took part in the cognitive activation study. A good start would be to increase the sample size so it is possible to represent everyone on the globe. Due to their modest results, it would not be appropriate to say this method of genetic detection is highly reliable. Farazone et al. 2005 explains how gene studies that were mentioned previously do support the role of the genetic factors. However, the studies do show inconsistencies in that upon analysis, it indicated no significant difference between ADHD in twin pairs for cognitive performance measures. Dillon et al. 2014 suggests that genes may have a role to play with ADHD and its following behaviours. However, the available evidence suggests the effect size of a genetic contribution is likely to be small. They further mention that genes of a large effect size have not been found. Investigation into the merit of psychosocial factors involved with ADHD would be highly warranted. Fapar et al. 2013 outlines in their review that there is no single risk factor that can explain ADHD and further explains how ADHD is familial and heritable. He further explains how genetic tests cannot be used for prediction or diagnosis, beyond a predictable family history. Critiquing the basis of ADHD heritability allows us to understand that genetics cannot be the lone cause for ADHD, or it's very unlikely that they are the main lone cause for ADHD, when in actual fact it is a whole soup of different factors that contribute to the disorder. Further explanation states that genetic risk of ADHD simply increases the chances and is not the actual causation of the disorder. Heritability estimates refers to populations do not mean, on average, that 90% of an individual's ADHD is caused by genes. This suggests that a very small genetic factor is present. However, it would be more viable to look at psychosocial and environmental factors in partnership instead of dismissing factors some researchers may deem irrelevant. A gap found in several of these scientific studies is that a greater sample size is needed for more adequate statistical power. This seems to be a clear theme throughout this field of research, as each study differs ever slightly on the actual causation of ADHD. During this research, I have found multiple contradictory findings into the cause of ADHD, from one gene that causes it all, possible linkage to hormones but unlikely due to observed previous research, development, or even multiple gene sequences. What I did find more often, however, is the combination of genetics, environmental, and social influences being the most likely candidate for the cause and development of ADHD in children. Overall, a very controversial topic which deserves a lot more research conducted.
I'm Kate, and my part of this presentation is focusing on the prenatal exposure side to the development of ADHD in a literature critique. The whole idea of prenatal exposure is basically when the mother intakes tetragens during the 9 to 10 months of pregnancy. Tetragens is a term used to basically categorize things such as nicotine, alcohol, various drugs, and environmental factors. Anything that is harmful to the fetus during its stages of development during pregnancy is classed as a tetragen. The main focus of my research was looking at prenatal exposure, but we also have to take into account the possible paternal risks that the father may produce and how they affect the fetus. The effect may be slight, but it should still be investigated. A study by Broner et al. In 2006 identified this risk, but found that it was not as a great a risk in comparison to prenatal risk. To collect the data in regards to how much the mother and father smoked during pregnancy, this was often done using a self-reporting method via questionnaire. This can create bias, as recalling from memory can create issues due to not fully remembering how much they truly smoked during pregnancy. So then this will not be accurate, and then it affects validity. Overall, after reading the various past literature, they all are consistent with saying that smoking during pregnancy is a risk to developing ADHD. But the papers I've studied didn't include alcohol as a factor, bar one that was published by Hannah L. in 2014, which made the claim that smoking and drinking come hand in hand. In other words, there is a correlation. A large number of surveys have shown that smoking and drinking among people are strongly connected, such as the study of Bojana et al. 1997. In the future, more studies need to include both smoking and drinking alcohol as a risk, and they are just as equally as damaging to the development. And if there is a correlation, it needs to be explored what causes the most risk. The main critique of this study was that the children never had a formal diagnosis of ADHD by a psychiatrist. Across the board, the papers I've read used various methods, but the main method was the self-reporting via questionnaires and surveys like previously discussed. The main critiques of this method is often the bias. Like I previously spoke about when the mother and father recall and fill out the questionnaire, they may not be truthful with the answers. In this situation, they were recalling from memory, so they generally might not fully remember how much they smoked. And this was quoted by Ford et al. In 1997. A study by Dong et al. 2014 used a meta-analysis. This looked at the association between prenatal exposure to smoking during pregnancy and how it links to ADHD. Using this method type allows for a better data collection, as you scour the databases and extract useful data and compile it into one larger study. Like all methods, they do have limitations. The study's validity depends on the quality of the data that was compiled. They only reviewed certain studies based on factors such as age of the child and how much the mother smoked during pregnancy. Meta-analysis can also be affected by reporting bias, as they are only going to gather the data that contributes a positive outcome for the hypothesis that they are tested. A researcher will most likely compile this all into one go, because they won't obviously criticise their own study in the first place. Quoted by Sanchez Mecca et al. 2010. Overall, we can see there is an extensive interest, as the theme of prenatal exposure has been studied and reviewed a great number of times over the past few years. I can predict that it will most likely be explored again in the future, as it isn't a confirmed conclusion. Overall, looking at the studies, they are in great much debate. There is a lot of arguments that propose it is other factors that can cause main risks, such as the hereditary argument that was discussed, as well as in home and out-home environments that is going to be discussed. Study by Covas et al. 2014 mentions all of these risks and argues that the ADHD is developed due to all of these risks combined into one. You can think of it as a snowball effect. If you have the gene, then over time, depending on the prenatal period during pregnancy and the environment you are brought up, could lead to ADHD, but this would need further research to back up the hypothesis. This could be some form of model, but yet it's unknown.
On the other hand, there are environmental influences which impact children with ADHD. I made an Iverson and I'm researching the in-home effects of ADHD because it's the first line of defence against ADHD. The family will usually be the first ones to identify symptoms of ADHD and get a child checked by a doctor. The family plays a crucial part in the development of ADHD, as the sooner the child is diagnosed, the sooner treatment can begin. This means that both parents and child with ADHD will find it easier to manage the children's symptoms than if the individual with ADHD was diagnosed later in life. The family dynamic and relationships are crucial towards the development of symptoms within the child. Mulligan et al. 2016 found that a positive household with supportive parents is more likely to reduce hyperactive symptoms, whereas a negative household where the child isn't supported and taken care of well will only exacerbate the symptoms. The behaviour of a child with ADHD can have an effect on the people around them. Dalt 2009 found that the parents of a child with ADHD feel stressed because of the demand of their time and energy taken up by the child. According to Beffra and Barkley 1985 and Pressman et al. 2006, this stress can lead to a strain on family relationships through marital discord and a high rating of family conflict. Alongside this, parents must manage the financial difficulties of having a child with ADHD, as Lee et al. Describes in 2013 that the cost of ADHD treatments can have a negative mental effect on parents, for example, added stress. However, not all families experience this difficulty, as many parents accept financial aid from a wide range of charities such as the Family Welfare Association and the Frank Bottle Trust, etc. Parents aren't the only ones who are affected by the symptoms of ADHD. If there are any siblings in the family, they will equally be affected. Peacegood et al. Reported in 2016 that the siblings they interviewed reported a low overall happiness with life and within their families. This is due to how the child with ADHD acts. McCamey and Piffner 2008 explained the behaviour through outbursts of name-calling, physical violence and bullying between the siblings. They further noted that this form of victimization is overlooked in the family due to the child having ADHD. Alongside this, King, Alexander and Serby 2016 found that non-ADHD siblings express their feelings with differential parental treatment, which is mostly because of the parents' belief that non-ADHD siblings can't take care of themselves. Kendall 1989 reported that the main reason non-ADHD siblings reported low happiness was due to the caretaking of their sibling with ADHD, for example, helping them take medication and their feeling of sorrow and loss. This is because they believe that they don't receive much attention from the parents and are expected to take care of their sibling with ADHD. However, ADHD symptoms can be managed through medical medication or psychosocial interventions. There are lots of types of interventions, such as music therapy, dietary interventions, etc., but the most highly used are yoga and cognitive behavioural therapy, also known as CBT. Harrison, Manocha and Rubia established in 2004 that a child with ADHD requires more active interventions such as yoga, which has been found to be highly effective in children. If the intervention is completed with family members, it would bring the family closer, thus strengthening the family relationships. This type of psychosocial intervention makes the ADHD symptoms easy to maintain for both the child with ADHD ADHD and their family members. As a child with ADHD ages, these active interventions don't become as successful, although Safran et al. 2005 and Anshel et al. 2011 found and supported the use of cognitive behavioural therapy (CBT) for adults with ADHD, as this addresses the individual thought processes. The other course of treatment is medication. The most commonly prescribed medication is methylphenidate and dextroamphetamine. However, Salanto, Einstein and Castellanos described in 2011 the medication prescribed has a lot of side effects and may affect the child in behaviour in different ways, for example irritability and anxiety. Strang et al. 2011 found that drugs are a quick and effective method to control these symptoms. Overall, many studies such as Brown 2005, Klein and Bitkoff in 1977 found that a combination of both the medical treatment and the appropriate psychosocial interventions have the most positive effect on managing the ADHD symptoms. The main criticisms arose when analysing articles used in the presentation, which are selectively using nuclear families. Due to only nuclear families being used, this gives the studies low external validity, meaning that results may only be applied to nuclear families and not, for example, single parent families. Alongside this, it creates a gap in the literature and a lack of awareness for the family types. Another point is the use of self-reports. While self-reports present a social desirability bias where people want to present themselves in a positive light, they may be the only option to gather the information we require. Observations could be used, but ethically they may be used as too intrusive. The uses of cross-sectional design was used. This allows us to gather a snapshot in time. However, for studies researching sibling and parental relationships, this snapshot timing may not be representative, as they may answer the questions based on how they are feeling in the moment. Most studies had a small sample size. A small sample size is understandable due to the low percentage of children and adolescents with ADHD. The small sample size, however, increases difficulty to find significant relations from the information. Thus, the results may not be representative of all children, adolescents, and adults with ADHD. The use of only heterosexual couples was used in studies. The majority of the articles used heterosexual couples, although none of them measured to see if there was a different effect on family relationship with, for example, a homosexual couple. Therefore, again, the results can only be applied to heterosexual couples. Most of the studies were only short-term studies. The issue with the articles only being short-term studies is that you cannot measure the adverse effects of ADHD on family or treatments of ADHD over a long time. Another issue is there's no step or half-brothers or sisters used. All articles researching siblings' relationships with non-ADHD siblings only use biological brothers and sisters. None have looked into the relationship between siblings with ADHD and step or half-brothers or sisters. This may be able due to the struggle of collectively finding a willing participant base with a step or half-brothers or sisters with one having ADHD. Studies also overlook out-of-home influences. With all the articles used, they examine the in-home effects only. However, out-of-home events can influence behaviour within the home. For example, a child with ADHD attending school may be affected by other school pupils, which may disrupt their behaviour further. Finally, the studies mainly use males in the participant base. Mainly males are used in the research of ADHD. This is understandable as ADHD is prominently in males, therefore collecting a participant base of willing males is appropriate. However, results may be not applied to females with ADHD as their relationships with their family and reaction to treatment may differ from the males. Overall, ADHD generally has a negative effect on the family dynamic and relationships. If ADHD is identified by the family, as they would be the first to identify the signs, then treatment can begin. This can alleviate the stress that the family members feel, while also making the child's symptoms more manageable for both the child with ADHD and the family. But as the child with ADHD ages, a change in the type of psychosocial interventions is appropriate. Future researchers consider applying all types of individuals to the research, for example homosexual couples, females, step and half siblings, etc., as this was found to be the main recurring critique.
My name is Christian Redabot and I will be critiquing the literature studying the impact ADHD has on an individual's social development outside of the home. When reviewing the DSM-5 for the typical symptoms of ADHD, the hyperactive and impulsive symptoms list socially unacceptable behaviours but fail to mention that such dysfunction in social development is to come of this condition, thus sparking an interest in how children and adolescents with ADHD are affected when it comes to their social interactions with those other than their family. Typically, 50 to 70% of children who have been diagnosed with ADHD experience peer relationship difficulty, including peer rejection, which highlights the significance of social impairment for this population. It has been mentioned that as children with ADHD get older, such impacts upon them change, meaning the social deficits they may experience as a child may differ to when they are an adolescent. Research into this topic has found the impairment of social development of ADHD children is most apparent at age 7. However, it has been revealed that children below this age are able to develop ADHD, for example, preschool age children, and therefore display such deficits. As most of the research centered around this topic was predominantly focused on school-aged children, this sparked an interest into this preschool population to discover if they experience the same deficits. A study conducted by D. Wolf, Byrne and Borden 2000 looked at the parental ratings and self-ratings of preschool children in the following domains: behavioral disturbance, social competence, and familial environment. When compared to their typically developing counterparts, children with ADHD were rated by their parents as being non-compliant, less adaptive, and less socially skilled. However, when the children rated themselves, they perceived themselves to be as competent and socially accepted by their peers as the typically developing children. Another study by DuPaul et al. 2001 also confirms these findings, in which they discovered that preschoolers with ADHD were less socially skilled and exhibited more negative social behavior according to the parental and teacher ratings. When investigating school-aged children, the same conclusions are drawn, in which it has been found that those with ADHD more often displayed actions of relational aggression and less pro-social behavior when compared to typically developing peers, as shown by Ohan and Johnston. Green et al. Used ratings made by mothers to assess the social competence of teenage girls and discovered that, again, those with ADHD were rated significantly lower when it came to social competence when compared to typically developing girls. These girls were also assessed on the Global Assessment of Functioning scale, in which they scored very low on it, indicating that such social dysfunction is having an impact on their day-to-day functioning. By ADHD resulting in a lacking of these social skills, this tends to lead to peer rejection, in which can lead to general impairments such as delinquency later in life. Although research appears to be consistent within itself in suggesting that the development of ADHD can result in social dysfunction, it is important to draw on the fact that some studies are presenting such results using ADHD children who have comorbid disorders. This includes disorders such as conduct disorder, operational defiant disorder, and anxiety. Such comorbidity is known to affect 45 to 84% of children diagnosed with ADHD. So when studying such dysfunction in these children, knowing that they are comorbid with another behavior disorder makes it difficult to distinguish whether the severity of the social dysfunction is due to them having ADHD or a combination of the disorders, especially when behavior disorders such as operational defiant disorder and conduct disorder characterize similar antisocial behaviors as ADHD. This is supported by Ohan and Johnston, who studied girls who had ADHD and operational defiant disorder, comparing them to those with just ADHD and typically developing girls. From this, they discovered that those who were comorbid were the least pro-social of the three groups, thus suggesting that in actual fact having a comorbid disorder can intensify such an impairment. However, research by Lee, Falk and Aguirre reported otherwise, in which they found that when comparing those with ADHD only and those with ADHD plus anxiety, their level of social impairment was consistent with each other, and no group presenting to be more or less socially impaired, therefore suggesting that future research must be conducted to discover whether the severity of the impairment is dependent on the disorder that ADHD is comorbid with. The most common method of data collection within this area is the use of behavioral rating scales completed by the parents of the children. Some studies have even decided to collect ratings of such behavior from the children themselves. This poses issues for the particular study because asking the children to rate themselves opens the door to an inaccurate presentation of their actual behavior, because they lack the cognitive abilities to be aware of the impact of their behavior. Moreover, the reliability of the ratings made by parents can also be questioned, in a sense that as the ratings that they are giving their children may not be completely objective, as there may be other factors that may influence the way they perceive their child's behavior, for example, parent-child relationship or emotional impairment caused by stress at that point in time. Najman et al. 2001 supports this through the discovery that mothers who were emotionally impaired were more likely to report their child as having behavior problems in comparison to mothers who were not emotionally impaired. On the other hand, DuPaul et al. 1998 decided to test the internal reliability of such ratings made by parents and teachers about children with ADHD, in which they asked them to rate the child's behavior and then asked them to do the same 4 weeks later, and found no difference in the ratings, thus alluding to the fact that the parents are not always influenced by their personal bias when rating their child's behavior. To conclude, ADHD cannot be explained through one specific approach, whereas it is a combination of all approaches which influence the development of ADHD. Therefore, any research must consider all approaches when conducting research.
ADHD itself can affect everyone surrounding the child with it, mostly in a negative way, whether that be at home or outside the home. Treatment can help manage the symptoms and ease the negative effects of ADHD. Future research should consider the child as a whole, instead of the effects of ADHD has on the people around them and how that develops from childhood to adolescence.
Upon reflection, I have determined that group work and finding an equal work-university balance are two factors that I need to improve on. I do have a preference for individual work, however I do understand the skill set and how important it is to be able to work well as a group. Secondly, one improvement I could make would be to try and prioritise work and university in a healthy manner. Due to working very long hours, this took a toll on my seminar attendance and ultimately overall my work in developmental psychology.
When I set my personal deadline, I struggle to hit them on time because I have a disorganised schedule and find it hard to have a manageable work and university balance. This prevented me from progressing at a fast rate, and it is shown by how late I finish my work, but yet I still hit the submission deadline. I have learned that I need to make sacrifices for my education if I want to achieve the best grade possible for my final year and graduate with no regrets. When completing this ICA, I became aware that I found it hard to work in a group setting. Previous years, I've always allowed to work on my own assessments, and I've grown comfortable with that. I think due to having such a short deadline time, we were forced to realise that we have to accept and understand and that people have their own working styles and abilities. In the future, I should try to push myself more into group work as it will allow me to grow as a person.
I constantly struggle to set aside time to complete my work. My issue with time management is echoed outside this piece of group work, as I often prioritise certain aspects of my life over others, or pieces of work over others. I have learnt that I must find a balance between all aspects of my life, for example, work, university, social life. This will allow work to be completed on time in advance of the deadline. This is crucial skill I need to work on, as within a job later in life I may be expected to complete a task with a specific time frame, and I would have to adapt that balance to incorporate the time frame set. I struggled with group work in the past, specifically people not completing the work they are assigned. This is because I am used to working by myself on tasks, so I control all aspects of the task. This issue of working in a group is also affected outside this group task within my job, as I am required to work as a team to complete tasks, but end up getting frustrated as someone isn't contributing as much as everyone else. I have learnt that I must relinquish control of all aspects to others. I have managed this by creating a Facebook group chat so we could discuss the task and help each other if there is anything we don't understand. This is important for later in life, as I won't be able to control all aspects of what happens in a task, especially in a job setting.
From the beginning of my degree, I have always battled with meeting deadlines, more so when I've got multiple clustering around the same date. The deadline for this presentation was the earliest I have ever had to hand in relation to when it was set. This immediately rang bells in my head that I could not waste time in actually starting it, as there was a fair amount of research that needed to be carried out for it. I had to make sure I was managing my time effectively so that I could finish my allocated part of the presentation on time. Although my time management is not terrible, this assignment has most definitely taught me to start my task on time, whether it be in an assignment at university or in full-time work, as it becomes very beneficial in the long run, as there is less stress created from the upcoming deadline. Considering that I was absent the first week in which the assignment was set, this had already set me back on starting the presentation, so when I returned the following week, I had to make sure I was caught up with everyone else in the group so that the presentation would not suffer due to my absence. This as well as being told that we were being marked individually and not as a group, made me more aware of being accountable for my contribution, and that I could not rely on anyone else to do the work for me and carry my weight because it's not their responsibility.